Leaders have the power and responsibility to drive systems change. But what leadership styles and practices are needed to expand the scope of business?
The topic of day 3 is the human dimension of sustainability. Sustainability is not just a technical challenge, but a human challenge that requires human qualities such as creativity, compassion, and above all, motivation to play a role. We're very excited to have a discussion with Kailash Satyarthi, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who demonstrates these qualities in his fight against child labor.
In our lifetime, we will see the end of child labor. This should be the last generation which is witnessing child labor. We will do it.
He will talk with Polman, former CEO of Unilever, and a major contributor to the Sustainable Development Goals, on how to integrate fairness and justice in the international value chain.
It's impossible for individual companies alone to make the changes that are truly needed, and yet every CEO knows what needs to be done. But frankly, it's impossible for them individually to do that. So if you can create these courageous collectives, you can actually move faster.
In the panel, Heather Grabby, Daan Stam and Shwetal Shah will, together with Kailash Satyarthi and Paul Polman, explore the role of collaboration and future leaders in driving sustainable change. Future leadership is also the overarching topic of the breakout sessions in which young leaders will take the lead. In the first breakout, we will explore which qualities professionals working in the public sector need. In the second breakout, we discuss what the changing scope of business means for leadership in the business sector. In the third breakout, we delve into leadership in societies and communities. This requires different leadership styles and practices. What is different and how can people demand and accelerate change? Join the third day, because together we shape future leadership.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Supply Chain of Gratitude Dialogue. My name is Sander Tiedemann. I'm the Executive Director of Garrison Institute, an incubator for social change and sustainable leadership in the US and the Netherlands. And we're very happy to have partnered with the Partnership Resource Center of the Rotterdam School of Management over the last couple of days to co-create this amazing, large-scale and impactful event. I will take over from Professor Rob van Tulder as your moderator for today. And I welcome you all, some hundreds of people, I think 1,000 people have registered, for joining us today on the hop-in screen. And you're coming from 72 countries, which is amazing. And I really look forward to this last day of the 3-day discussion on driving systems change for the Sustainable Development Goals. And today we will really shift gears from the external technical challenges that are out there that are urgent to the human dimension of systems change. Yes, so it's the third day of a 3-day event. It's also the beginning of a series of dialogues between Nobel Peace Prize laureates and business leaders in global sustainability and youth leaders. We do this together with Peace Gem Foundation, which is representing Nobel Peace laureates across the world, and a large network of youth leaders for a more peaceful world, together with the European Platform for Compassionate Leadership in Luxembourg, and also with support from the Triple Value Foundation. This is something we've called the compassionate leadership in an age of radical interconnectedness, because that's what we believe sustainability represents. It's a function of an interconnected, interdependent world that really requires a different type of leadership, which we've titled compassionate leadership. And this will all lead to a learning platform called Future Planet Accelerator, an innovative program for young aspiring change leaders for sustainability. So in a way, this event is our inaugural event for the dialogue on compassionate leadership and the Future Planet Accelerator. Now, why do we do this? First of all, this is a call to action. As discussed in the last 2 days, it's clear that we're in a major transition in the world economy and in the way we do business. Sustainability is now driving the agenda, and we're just at the beginning of a major disruptive transformation. and it's impacting all the companies, all countries, and all people across the world. And again, I said it before, this is not just a technical challenge, this is a human challenge, you know, and it requires our full human capacity to be engaged. And there was a lot of talk the last 2 days about mindset shifts and leadership and new ways of thinking. So this is really what we're going to do today. What is it? What sort of leadership, what sort of human capacity is required for this incredible disruptive transformation that we're facing? So I said that I think it is something called compassionate leadership. It could be collective compassionate leadership. And really, you know, to use the L word, it is, I think it has to be rooted in the love for humanity and the planet. I think these are big words, but I think it's time that we say it. You know, we are part of the world and we need to take care of the world and everyone on it. So, and also because this requires everyone to be engaged, and that only happens when we are engaged through the heart, not just through the mind. Now, so I'm very, very pleased and honored and humbled that we have invited two amazing visionary leaders who have demonstrated this type of leadership that we now need in the future, both in very different contexts, both working in a way on the global economy, but on different sides of the spectrum. Kailash Satyarthi, who we'll invite in a minute, he worked from the grassroots, you know, with child labor and slavery and forced labor and many of what we call externalities in the supply chain and the economy, trying to internalize that into the system, which is a process of the human dimension, which he has called the supply chain of gratitude. Paul worked from the side of corporations, the other side of the spectrum, but also showed tremendous impact and success on that level in internalizing all the externalities. So first I would like to give the floor, give the screen, that's a better word, to Kailash Satyarthi. Very pleased for you to join us today. And we'd love to hear what has been your journey through life. And I just want to open with a few statements. Of course, you won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014. Hi, Kailash. Very nice to see you. Thank you for joining. Thank you. Thank you. And you also have rescued some 83,000 people from slavery since 1980. So that is an incredible feature in itself. And here are just a few of your statements. Your dream, a world where are free, safe, healthy, and receive quality education. Yes, beautiful. So some of your statements, we have to recognize our inherent connectedness and interdependence. Until each one of us is safe, nobody is safe. And finally, we have to reclaim our humanity and globalize compassion. Wonderful language. And also the term supply chain of gratitude, I think, comes from your lectures. And we would love to hear more on what this means, but most important, what's been your journey to create that and take this challenge on you and be this incredible leader that you are. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Sander, Tideman, my friends in Peace Jam and Garrison Institute, dear young friends, sisters and brothers. At least in my lifetime and in the lifetimes of most of you, we have not witnessed so much devastation, frightening situation, uncertainty, anxiety due to this pandemic. And that is the time to create and strengthen more compassionate leadership from bottom to top, everywhere. As we know that we have enough answers to many questions related to leadership, related to management, related to business solutions, and so on. We have enough resources and enough knowledge. We have globalized technology, knowledge, production, wealth, information, and we have seen good results as well as the the consequences of it among the people and in context with the planet. And I always say that while we globalize markets and economies and technologies, there is a dire need for globalization of compassion. When we talk of globalization of compassion, we are not talking about sympathy or empathy. When we talk of creating and strengthening compassionate leadership, we talk of leaders who can feel the suffering of others as their own suffering and connect with them at that deeper level to solve that suffering, take the leadership, take the initiative, have the courage, take the risk to solve that suffering as their own suffering. So it is not about being sympathetic to the people who are suffering or being empathetic, but being courageous enough to feel that suffering as your own, as well as to solve that suffering as your own. And that's why the true leadership is during these most difficult times in crisis. And we have seen in many parts of the world that we did not learn enough lesson. We say that world is interconnected. We say that we are walking on one earth and that one earth belongs to us. But sometimes it looks that these phrases have become rhetoric. We say that we are independent, but really we feel from inside that we are independent, so we feel responsibility to each other, not as a moralistic and ethical terminology, but very simple, that do we really feel connected with each other around us and feel the suffering of others or pain of others and be the problem solver? I have serious doubt. Pandemic has exposed injustices and inequalities which were prevailing in our society. Not only exposed, but exacerbated. I will give you a couple of examples. Last year, $8 trillion have been allocated to rescue what they call the COVID response fund. But out of that $8 trillion, only 0.13% has been allocated for the marginalized people in the developing world by the rich countries. Rest of the money has been allocated to rescue their own financial institutions and businesses and corporations. And the result was that 2/3 of the world's wealthiest corporations have earned an additional profit of $109 billion last year, whereas 140 million children and their people belonging to poor sections of society and marginalized communities have been pushed into acute poverty, extreme poverty. This means we have a lot of good words to talk in the meetings and conferences and other places, but do we really act on it? The compassionate leadership is not about preaching, it's about acting, it's about doing, it's about taking the risk. So today, when we talk of the supply chain of gratitude, I'm sitting here in this room, and I'm grateful to all those masons and electricians, plumbers, people who worked in brick kilns and manufactured bricks and table and chair and all these kind of carpenters. So I feel grateful to them. I'm grateful to you because you are listening, and I'm grateful to everyone who is connecting us today. Same way, we should feel gratefulness to each other because we live, not because of ourselves, not because of we have a lot of money and knowledge and we come from different kind of backgrounds, but we live because of so many people responsible for our food and clothing and housing and whatnot. And that is a long, long chain. It is not just somebody is offering food to us on table, but the different ingredients of the food have been produced by different people in different places, and their families and their communities have contributed in it. So it's a long chain. When we talk of gratitude, we have to feel a kind of sense of gratefulness and have that and build that supply chain, which will be very helpful in creating a much better world, much peaceful and sustainable world. There are so many studies which prove that the grateful people are happier people, polite people. They have more inner power. Even it has been researched that their neuroelasticity level is higher. They have much more neuroelasticity. There are also several studies prove that they have much more bigger amount of endorphin hormone which is produced, and that makes us more enthusiastic, more happy, and so on, and more creative. So these are very clear studies and examples which prove that how useful is that sense of gratefulness, and if we create the supply chain of gratitude. The same thing goes to the leaders. The politicians must feel that they are not just popular leaders, but they are because of their voters. They are also because of their citizens. How much they feel the sense of compassion and the gratitude, not just express their gratitude, but feel the gratitude that we are because of you, then the leadership would be different. The presidents and prime ministers' behavior would be different. But we see the growing populism and autocratic regimes in different parts of the world. So they have to have that compassionate leadership through believing in the supply chain of gratitude. Similarly, the corporate leaders. If the corporate leaders are grateful to their board members, their managers, their staff, and all those people who are engaged in the supply chain of their production and supply, so they have to feel more grateful to those who are producing wealth for them, working in the mines and factories and other places at the cost of their sometimes lives. So that gratefulness and the supply chain of gratitude will help in creating a different kind of compassionate leadership among the corporate leaders also. So this way, we can definitely learn a lot. But as I said before, that this is the time to globalize compassion. And I know that you said that 1,000 audience are sitting here, and many of them I heard are young people. So the youth are much more purer than many of us. Our minds and our hearts are polluted, but not of the children and young people. We can count on them. We can count on their honesty and truthfulness and passion that can drive the whole world for a better future, more sustainable society, more sustainable earth, and sustainable people. I'm sure that this exercise will help a lot in building compassionate leadership among the young people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kailash, for your words of wisdom and encouragement. And I'd love to explore this concept of compassionate leadership further with you. But let's first introduce Paul Polman on the screen as well. Paul, of course, is well known as a corporate leader who embraced sustainability and brought his company Unilever along. In a decade, he made Unilever the sort of most respected sustainable business in the world for many years in a row. And he personally was also elected to be the most respected business leader for sustainability for many years in a row. So, and he's known for realizing the sustainable living plan at Unilever, which had major social and environmental impact in the business. And this, interestingly, for this audience today, welcome, Paul. Good afternoon. Good to see you. I'll just take a few words to introduce you further, if you don't mind. Because we have so many young people, it's interesting that under your leadership, Unilever became the most attractive employer for graduates worldwide. And I think some 92% of Unilever staff, Unilever employees, feel that they can live their purpose in Unilever. So clearly sustainability and also your leadership, I must say, has been a key talent attractor, which is interesting for the conversation. But you've also proven that sustainability also delivers shareholder return. In the last decade, you had 22 and 90% growth in shareholder return, which means that sustainability and compassion and profit are actually not mutually exclusive, as many people still believe. And now imagine you're building courageous collectives, for business leaders to transform and follow your footsteps in turning their companies into sustainable companies in support of sustainable development goals. So if I can ask, what has been your journey, through all this, in the business sector of embracing sustainability and also manifesting compassion for the planet, if I can use those words, to also create a link with the work of Kailash. You somehow have connected the dots between all the externalities basically and internalized that in your business. But that's a sign of leadership. So I would love to hear that story.
Well, thanks, Sander, and obviously thanks for all what you are doing. And it's really an honor to be there with Kailash. Kailash and I met a few years ago in Mumbai when we gave him his Unilever the Global Citizens Award, and he was kind enough to come to Mumbai to talk to our leadership team, our board, and share his incredible journey and especially what he does for the underprivileged children especially. So he's been a great inspiration for us, and hopefully we in our own modest way have been able to contribute to his cause as well. I've been fortunate in my career because I've worked for Unilever, but before that for P&G and Nestle. They're all great companies with great values. They're frankly built to last, and they helped me shape into what I am today, amongst many other things. So lots of respect to them. But it was clear to me as I climbed up the corporate ladder that the corporate world had a key role to play to address many of these global issues. In fact, the global economy, if you look at that, 65% is the private sector. It creates 90% of the jobs. It does most of the financing. So if the private sector doesn't actively participate in making this world function, it not only makes life difficult for itself, but then obviously the future of mankind really is at risk. So in the financial crisis about 10, 12 years ago, we saw the shortcomings already of our economic system and refused to respond to that. Many felt were too big to fail. It caused a problem in the first place, but people were too small to matter. And frankly, governments didn't address these most burning issues being climate change and inequality, that I would single out, especially on the Sustainable Development Goals. Climate change still on a trajectory to well over 3 degrees. And as we've seen lately, it's the poor and the disadvantaged, the marginalized that pay a significantly higher price. Inequality going up rapidly. And increasingly people felt that they were not participating anymore in the global system. And when too many people feel they're not participating, or that they're being held back, if you want to, they start to rebel against it. And that's what you've seen. First in the streets and later on in the polls. And it has given us a lot of politicians that have preached populism, xenophobia, nationalism to a level that has become frankly unhealthy. Under the principle that nobody benefits from societies that don't function, I also think that business has to play a key role. In Unilever, when we started, we said, why don't we start to build a business model that maximizes its positive impact on all of its stakeholders, and both environmentally as well as social. We called it the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. Quite some audacious targets, a plan with a horizon of about 10 years. But it was all meant to have a positive net impact in society, i.e. being part of the solutions versus being part of the problems. And then things around us happened, like the Rana Plaza, where 1,100 women innocently lost lives. Modern day slavery at its best, I would call it, brought higher attention to a value chain. John Ruggie, who came out with the Ruggie frameworks, or the UN Global Compact, which is 10 principles. I was involved in the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. The then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon asked me to be part of a panel of 27 people representing the private sector to help these develop these important goals for humanity, if you want to, a roadmap for survival. And it sharpened our thinking. It made a broader business model more relevant. And then we had COVID, as obviously Kailash rightfully referred to. COVID has been a rude awakening for all of us. It really has shown us the cost of failure of our current systems. By the way, it would have been much cheaper to prevent. Kailash is kind to say 8 trillion has been spent. Yes, Kailash, 16 trillion has been spent. 22 trillion of GDP has been lost. If you realize that the global development goals only cost an incremental $3 to $5 trillion, we've spent just on COVID alone 3 to 4 times more. The cost of not acting now is exceeding the cost of acting, which is a bizarre situation to be in. And obviously for the people that understand that want to contribute, an enormous opportunity. Citizens are demanding change. The financial market is starting to demand change. We've seen that especially in the last few days around climate change. And increasingly the responsible governments are demanding change. And it is important for the private sector, being such an important part, to be actively part of that. We have discovered with COVID very clearly that we can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. We've also discovered this enormous complexity of the relationships between human beings, biodiversity, human health, the racial dimensions with the tragic death of George Floyd, climate change, the economy. It is complex, but it is all related. In the end, we are all connected. And we've also discovered, I think above all, that we cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. And anything that we cannot do by definition infinitely is non-sustainable. So the reckoning has come. It is a moment for all of us to rise to the challenge. And these are challenges that are so big that none of us individually can really solve that. It requires new forms of partnership. The solutions to this pandemic, as well as this decade-long global crisis I talked about of climate change or biodiversity or inequality or racial dimensions and poverty, to name a few, lie indeed, as was mentioned, in empathy and compassion, in system thinking and collective action. And the big word here is indeed, as you both have mentioned, compassion or compassionate leadership. Are we moved by compassion to do something? Are we driven in our compassion and suffering of others? Because ultimately, we have never been so forewarned about what is going to happen. We've never been so forearmed with tools to do something about it. But what really is missing is really our own willpower, the leadership of the people that are in a position to do something, to step forward and go into this uncomfortable field, if you want to be courageous. So how do we build a compassionate society? My wife just wrote a book which is called The Immaculate Cells, and it deals with the golden rule. And when you're in doubt, whatever religion you're in, you actually have the golden rule. Do unto others, and I would add the planet to that, as you would have them done unto you. And that's already a good starting point, or guidance if you want to. A society where people give, in my opinion, would also get a lot in return. And when there is no giving, which is the same in life, there's also no return. And real leadership for all of us starts at the moment when we realize that investing in others and putting the interest of others ahead of our own, that ultimately we're better off ourselves as well, which is the essence of goal number 17 that we put in, the goal of partnership. Partnership not in a contractual piece of paper, but partnership for the common good, if you want to. It's a moral partnership. And what COVID has shown once more is that we probably collectively, would be the right way to say it politely, have grossly fallen short in taking care of our neighbors and our planet. So I hope that this is a moment that we rethink leadership, that we rethink some of these values, that we need to anchor things like empathy or compassion or kindness into the core of what we are doing. And that is really building to business. And that's the only way that we can build back better. the task ahead for us is actually enormous, if I may say. And there are the main priorities, not surprisingly, and especially with the sad news coming from India as well, is to overcome the pandemic and strengthen our health systems. But then we need to restore growth and deliver jobs, especially the young people. If we don't address the issue, we have lost about 500 million equivalent jobs during COVID, 150 million people back into absolute poverty. If we don't address that issue, we'll get bigger issues of social cohesion. And then obviously we need to look at an inclusive growth, including gender, and be sure that the women and many marginalized are not further marginalized as we've seen during COVID. And finally, to make things even more challenging, we need to address these wonderful issues that we have created of climate change or biodiversity loss or environmental degradation. And these are major, major systems changes of a magnitude that we've never seen before. So this is where the challenge is. This is where the private sector needs to play. This is where goal number 17 comes in. And successful companies, in the end, will understand that profit, frankly, should not come from creating the world's problems, but actually from solving them. They will also understand the power of purpose. And for business to be successful long-term, they will then actually need to show that they can have a net positive impact, or in other words, make this world a better place. I just finished a book that I will be publishing in September, which I call Net Positive. Companies that put purpose at their core, that take responsibility of their total impact in society, that don't pursue profit for the sake of it, but as a result of what they do, that work in these broader partnerships. These are the type of businesses that we need to cherish. These are the type of businesses that we need to embrace and hopefully start to address. When we can embed this sustainable thinking, this net positive thinking into corporate strategies, I think that will be the moment that we can be proud of individually as companies and collectively addressing some of these major challenges that we are talking about.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. It's always a joy to listen to you. Such a clear vision and so much determination for change, and wonderful way of framing also the golden rule and net positive. I love to take that further, and we will do so. Just a point of process. We of course we don't have much time. I have one or two more questions for each one of you. Then I'll ask a youth leader representing Peace Jam to join in as well, and then we will take one or two questions from the audience. And so the audience is basically encouraged to put in your questions into the Q&A on the right side on the stage. At least on my screen, it's on the right side. So please be brave and share your views, and hopefully one or two of those questions can actually be answered by both of you. So well, there's much to say and much to ask. I'd like to go into the deep dive of compassionate leadership immediately, because there are many young people here, and the world, as you said, we know the problem, right? The facts are there. Both of you speak to that. We can see, on our iPhones, we can see the problems of this world, and the inequality and the suffering that is out there. At the same time, many of us seem to be shutting off, or feel disempowered in complex world, seem overwhelmed. So you must have had in your careers those moments of of feeling powerless or feeling discouraged. I mean, those stories, I know this is maybe not something you'd like to share always, but this is somehow that in terms of the human dimension, this is how we learn. We learn by stories. We learn by role models like both of you. So maybe you could begin. And you have, of course, you started as a young kid fighting for social justice and slavery, free from slavery. So you have much to say, but just in a nutshell, what was the tipping point for you that made you a courageous leader, courageous, compassionate leader, if I can say?
Well, I can't say that I am a courageous, compassionate leader, but I believe that I can always learn from children, their simplicity, their power of truthfulness and honesty and enthusiasm, and quest for learning, forgiveness, and things like that. And these are some of the properties of the children which everybody could learn. So childhood is not always about the age, it's about some of those key characteristics which every human being can have and can use. But it was in 1969 when the world was, or the India at least, was commemorating Mahatma Gandhi on his first centenary, birth centenary. So I listened the leaders who were talking against discrimination and racial discrimination, this untouchability which was prevailing in India between the caste hierarchy and so on. So I was very impressed. And then I thought that I should become a political leader because they speak so high and they are so genuine people, better than my own family who belong to highest caste, the priest Brahmin caste, and they used to practice untouchability. So one day I decided that let me invite some of those leaders, and then the untouchables can come and cook the food for those leaders. And once they eat together, then perhaps we will send a very strong message that then we can strongly send a message that we have to end this. So, and then we invited some leaders, these sweepress women who were untouchables.
Hello, I'm sorry, I was lost. I don't know where.
Can you hear me? Did you lose the voice? Hello, 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 hello.
No, I can hear you, Kailash.
I can hear.
Yeah, so maybe
I
rest
can't
of the
hear
people.
anyone. I can see myself.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So none of the leaders turn up, and these sweepress untouchable women were under shock, and they already warned me that.
Yeah, but I don't hear anything. I don't see anyone.
Nobody is going to come and eat. And I started crying as a 15-year-old young boy who dared to organize such an event, which was unprecedented in my small town in central India. And when I came back home, I saw that the high caste leaders, the priests, were sitting at my home and they were threatening to outcast my whole family. And that was perhaps the biggest punishment one can think of those days, even today, when the families are outcasted. Nobody will talk to them, nobody will marry in the family, and so on. And they were all angry with my family and later on with me for doing this kind of sin or exposing this problem. And finally, they have punished me and told that this boy will go to take holy dip, what you said. Sweta, everyone has quality of leadership. What is needed is a little spark. Everyone is born with an ocean of compassion. God can never be so meager to give you small drops of compassion. And compassion means courage. Compassion means leadership, connectivity, problem solver, not just be sympathetic, as I said before. Like this, I just pick up this wood piece, and I can see the fire in this. What is needed is a small matchstick or a small spark, and the fire will come out. So if young people are given small inspiration, that ocean of compassion, the fire, the light, the heat will come out. And I have seen, when we thought of challenging this, the vicious circle of child labor, poverty, and illiteracy, and launched a huge march in 1998, the Global March Against Child Labor, across 103 countries, with a demand that we need an international law urgently to eradicate the worst forms of child labor like slavery, trafficking, child prostitution, etc. I had full faith, my colleagues have full faith in the young people, and 15 million youth, and of course teachers, students, and other people, villagers, participated in the long march which went across 103 countries. and covered 80,000 kilometers distance. When we reached in Geneva, already 71 presidents, prime ministers, or kings or queens supported this idea of an international law, the Convention 182 popularly known now. And when we reached in Geneva, it has been accepted formally, and the next year, following year in 1999, this ILO convention has been adopted, and this has become the first ever universally ratified ILO convention last year. So this was the power of youth. Similarly, we launched a campaign, the Global Campaign for Education, and we have brought this whole issue of right to education in the global policy domain and the public domain. And the result was that in a number of places, the governments have changed their constitutions, the parliaments have changed their constitutions. Also, the ODA support for education has been increased. So there was a clear commitment in the Millennium Development Goals, but it has not been taken as a mass movement. So youth have built that mass movement, and now we have this fair share to end child labor campaign, which is led by the young people, what we call the 100 million campaign. 100 million young people should become the spokesperson, leaders, champions, and change makers, and demand a safe, free, and educated childhood for every child. And it is growing. And this year, since this is the United Nations year for the eradication of child labor, you as young people can join and contribute and take the leadership role. As Paul said, that take the driving seat actually. Need not to be followers all the time. You need not to see me or Paul as role models. You are our role model. We can learn a lot of things from you. And that's why young people should sit in the driving seat. You are the change. You should not look for others. You are the leader. You are the champions. You need not to look for Kailash Satyarthi.
Thank you so much. There is a whole debate in the chat room around compassion, including compassion for technology, because we had a few glitches. But it's wonderful to have this deep conversation with you. I think we need to almost close this part of this discussion, and you have to leave. I think, Kailash, you're also in a state of crisis in India, have to deal with the COVID issues. So maybe to close off, maybe you can make a final statement on whether compassion can be learned. That's a question that is not fully solved on the chat room.
Thank you. Compassion, as I said before, is inherent inside each one of us. But sometimes we keep it for ourselves, sometimes for our siblings, our husbands, wife, children, etc., etc. We feel that compassion for someone and sometimes for ourselves, but we do not enlarge that circle of compassion. As I said, that we don't have just small drops of compassion inside us. When we are able to discover the compassionate, the ocean of compassion inside us, then we can feel a different kind of relationship with humanity, people, planet, animals, trees, mountains, rivers, everything. Because then we feel that kind of relationship, that if they are in trouble, if the ecology is in trouble, if the river is in trouble, if water is in trouble, air is in trouble, then we feel that this is wrong. We feel that suffering, and then we try to solve that suffering. So the compassion has enormous, enormous possibilities and potential. And you said that in the chat room, somebody was talking about the compassion and technology. We are already in the age of artificial intelligence. Of course, artificial intelligence has brought a lot of good news in our life, particularly that data and algorithms and the solutions of health problems and ecological problems and so many other things could be solved through the information, through the artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence can play an important role in making this world better. But we also fear that that data capitalism or data business has led to a situation where our choices are completely controlled, our interests are controlled, even our choices to choose our leader, to elect our leaders are controlled. They can influence our mind so that some of these the leaders can use the data in our interest and control that and change our mindset using social media. But artificial intelligence is used in a good way, but also is being misused. And some of the social scientists and anthropologists say that in some years, our brains would be hacked, the humans would be hacked. So before human beings are hacked and controlled by fewer powerful people, better to see that how the technology could be used, artificial intelligence could be used in a compassionate manner. And we cannot create compassion in robots, but we can definitely create much more compassion and ignite that compassion in human beings who control those robots and that technology.
Well, thank you, Kailash. Thank you. And Paul, would you like to make a closing statement?
Yeah, I'll go very quickly. I think passion is about finding yourself, and purpose is about losing yourself to be to the service of others. And it happens your whole life that you have to work on that. We are still students in that journey. And in your life, you get your crucibles. In Newcastle, when I worked there, I saw second generation unemployment because of shipbuilding, steel, and coal mining. And the only thing a young girl could get was a baby. There wasn't anything else. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with 8 blind people, and I could see that disability is in your head. It's all they saw was possibilities, not disabilities. Then I was in Mumbai when I was stuck in the terrible night with the terrorists there, and I saw the goodness of people and how many people were born that night and how people embraced us. But I also saw the dark side of not taking care of people and making them come falling behind. So it forms your whole life, and you need to continue to work on that. And it is the moment that you realize how lucky you are that I think true compassion is there. I've realized a long time ago that I was just lucky I was born in the Netherlands. It gave me free education. I had a piece of bar soap. I didn't die of infectious diseases. I never went to bed hungry. But what did I do for it other than being born in the Netherlands? So I won the lottery ticket of life. It gave me freedom. That's why I'm talking to you right now. And it gave me a lot of other possibilities. Unfortunately, that's not true for 95% of the world population right now. So if you belong to the lucky ones that have won the lottery ticket of life, then I believe it's your duty, it's your obligation to put yourself to the service of others. The Dalai Lama said it well when he said that if you seek enlightenment simply for yourself to enhance your causes, you miss purpose. But if you seek enlightenment to help others achieve their objectives, you are with purpose. So my simple message to all of us is lead a life with purpose.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a joy to listen to both of you, to all of you, Sweetal. We see Sweetal further on in the panel as well. We're going to sort of reflect on what you've told us and try to see what we can do to implement all of that. But thank you, Kailash, Satyarthi, and Paul Polman for being such a role model leaders that provide inspiration in sometimes dark times. But you've given us a lot of inspiration, a lot of hope for the future, that leadership, that compassionate leadership can be learned and can be demonstrated, and that we can transform business as an agent for change, because that's also what it needs to do, right? It's not just compassion, but we have to change, as Paul also said, collective action, and the value chain needs to be transformed. Collective action is needed. So all that, but if it's rooted on compassion, I'm sure it's going to have the impact that it needs to have. So thank you so much, everyone. We will take a few minutes break now, and then we will get back to the panel. And Paul and Carlos, thank you. I wish we could applaud. I don't know how to do that technically, but we do a technical applaud via Hopin.
Good to see you. Be safe.
Thank you.
Sandro, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Namaste.
Soita. Well, thank you.
So welcome back, everyone. We had just a very short break. We have another break in about half an hour, a little bit of a longer break. But now I'd like to reopen the discussion and welcome the panel. You already met Shwetal Shah. She will come back in a minute. I also welcome Heather Grabe, the Director of Open Society, European Policy Institute,
And I welcome Dan Stam, Dean of Engagement and Professor of Leadership and Creativity at RSM. I hope you can join us in a minute. Hi, Shwetal.
Hi, Sander.
Dan, good afternoon, welcome.
Thank you.
And Heather is coming too. Yes, great, Heather, welcome.
Hello.
Well, thank you. I know you were at backstage and we had a few technical glitches, but I think maybe that was an effect of the incredible amount of inspiration that was flowing through the microwaves, because these were really powerful statements by powerful people, and I'm sure a lot of people have been inspired by that. And it's so nice to see all of you now, and we can take some time to go through it. And shall we go through? First start with Shwetal. You've been introduced a little bit when I was not there, but maybe you introduced yourself, but maybe you can share a few reflections on what you've heard, what you take away from the discussion earlier today, and please take a few minutes to share.
Thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Shwetal. As I mentioned, I'm originally from India, where Kailash ji is from as well. Moved to the UK about 8 years ago. And I'm really privileged to be invited by the Garrison Institute and Peace Jam Europe, who I have been volunteering with over the last 2 years, to be part of this panel discussion. I think one of the things that resonated with me from both of them was their emphasis on the fact that a lot needs to change in order for people from marginalized communities, whether that be in the global south or also in the developed parts of the world, in order for a lot of people to feel like they are part of the solution. And I think the way that Paul ended his speech by saying that young people especially don't need a seat at the table, they need the table. And I think we have been seeing that a lot nowadays with a lot of young people. Actually, in the UK, if I talk about Extinction Rebellion, a lot of people might assume that it is an extreme organization, but a lot of the work that they're doing is youth-led, and they have been holding a lot of organizations like Shell accountable as well. And I think from a lot of their points, it really struck me that even though they have achieved and made a lot of impact, they still see themselves as students on this lifelong journey of learning a lot and learning from younger people as well when they think about making impact, and that they see young people as role models. A lot of times young people wouldn't consider themselves to be role models, but I think it was great for them to mention that. I personally as well grew up in Mumbai. I saw a lot of poverty around me, but I wasn't in poverty myself, and that made me question my privileges a lot. And that's where I think when Kailash ji mentioned that 100 million youth fighting for 100 million young people who have been trafficked or who are in slavery and child labor, we need to talk for them. So I think I actually want to put a question forward for the audiences who are listening in to us. How would you use your privilege to give back to society and make an impact for those who may be in underserved communities? And I think I would like to say the action that I have taken, given that we don't have a lot of time, I just want to talk about one practical action that I have taken myself with the privileges that I have in partnership with the likes of Peace Jam. Is last year, I launched something called the Laureate of the Future Award. So Peace Jam basically invites Nobel Peace Prize winners like Kailash Satyarthi to talk to young people and inspire them to be on this journey of servant-based leadership. And when we launched Peace Jam, the Laureate of the Future Award, our motivation was to encourage young people by giving them access to funding of £200. We got funding from the Rotary Club in Winchester and access to mentors to encourage them to work on social action projects so they can make a difference in their communities. And that is one action and practical I guess, practical action that I have undertaken myself is to get funding from organizations, from corporates, to work with them as an ally and to bring those opportunities back to people as young as 11, give them funding, give them access to mentors, and encourage them to make a small difference. It doesn't have to be a huge difference. They don't have to move mountains. Even if they could help one person and learn new skills along the way, that's how I see us creating a compassionate economy where from a younger age, we make young people realize the privileges and the power they have to make a difference to society. Thank you.
Thank you, Shwetal. Very nice and great example. And you touch upon privilege, which I think we can discuss a little bit further. There was a bit of an echo in the beginning, so maybe people have found it difficult to hear, but the last part was very clear, and we will take that further later on. So Heather, can I welcome you and hear your reflections on what you've heard?
Thank you. It's been really fascinating and also really inspiring. Kailash is always an incredibly inspiring person to hear, especially because he himself has used his own privilege within Indian society, as he was describing. You missed, Sander, during the technical difficulty when you were offline, a very moving story he told about how his own Brahmin family were dealing with the issue of untouchables in India, and how he himself changed his name in order to reflect his own commitment to not using the caste system and to changing those attitudes within Indian society. And of course, he has himself done incredibly courageous work in rescuing people, especially children, from forced labor and from slavery. It's a fantastic example. And also Paul Polman, I was reflecting, he was talking about how lucky he was simply to have been born Dutch after the Second World War, and the health and the opportunities that gave him. And I think that's really something very valuable for all of us to reflect on, to give us some humility about, and also a sense of the need to give back. But I love the conception of the metaphor of the idea of the supply chain of generosity, because it is a supply chain. The more generous you are, the more generosity you receive, because it creates an energy, it creates a way of thinking, it creates a mindset. And Kailash was referring to the neuroscience that shows the benefits to the person who is generous, as well as to the person around them. So generosity is a supply chain that comes around in a loop. Now, my organization, Open Society Foundations, is also working on the economic supply chains, particularly in the agri-food industry, where there is often not a lot of generosity. In fact, there is cutthroat competition and really, really narrow margins. And I think it's really important that we think about what kind of practical action we could take. And I really appreciated Shwetal's question about how can people take action. And I think actually real, not just a metaphorical supply chains, but real supply chains are very much the place where that action can happen. Now, Kailash has taken action himself in supply chains where there is massive human misery in the production of beautiful and desirable objects. All of the amazing things that these tragically abused and exploited children were producing. And it's also very important to recognize that this happens not only in India, but also in the supply chains that supply goods all around the world. And the interdependence of those supply chains basically means we are all responsible. I think there are very few people on the planet who don't, in one way or another, consume items from supply chains that have come from somewhere else on the planet. Therefore, we all need to be aware of who has produced goods and in what conditions they have been produced. Now, Open Society Foundations, where I work, we've been working on finding ways to close the accountability black holes in supply chains where human abuses happen, abuses of both human beings and of nature. And it's important to recognize how COVID has made some of these black holes of accountability more prominent. For example, in the agri-food supply chain in Europe, and it's given a much greater political impetus to bring transparency and accountability in economic activities. it's very difficult, in fact, to be an ethical consumer, because the company that is selling you, say, asparagus in Europe, doesn't tell you where the food comes from and how, well, they may tell you the country, but not how it was produced. And we need much better certification and of ethical production standards to give consumers the choice and the power to exercise the power of the wallet, the purchasing power as well. Now, the good news is that attitudes are changing. The European Union is introducing environmental and human rights clauses into trade agreements. So far, they've been rather vague, non-binding statements, which means that, for example, we eat food like pears that are laced with pesticides, which are in fact banned in Europe, but are still produced in Europe, and then they're simply exported from Europe to other countries where they poison aquifers and soil and people. And then, of course, they're used to grow produce, which is then shipped to Europe. So it's really important to make those standards binding for the sake of the people working in the pear orchards as well as the consumers. There's also EU mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence. There's a lot of opposition to this, but there is now some movement from the European Commission, basically, which would require companies to do a lot more investigation and research on what happens to the environment and to the human beings across the whole supply chain. And I'm very happy to report that yesterday, Germany moved forward on a law that brings in 3 levels of responsibility for corporates, both for their own production, their direct suppliers, and then indirect suppliers. Then the third one, there's still not enough accountability in my view, but which would make companies responsible for collecting data and investigating how the products, which are, for example, components of something that they produce, say you're a car manufacturer, how have the components of the car produced in other countries been made, in what conditions have the people been working, what has been the environmental impact. And knowing that, by forcing companies to collect data on this and to investigate, you empower consumers because they can ask for that information from companies. You empower civil society, any organization outside the company, to ask for that data. You empower shareholders to ask for that kind of information. So then the black hole has a lot of light shone into it, and it closes essentially. So these are really important legal and regulatory measures that need to be brought in to supply chains in order to prevent the kinds of abuses that we've been listening to and talking about. And I'll just finish by pointing out that COVID has had some benefits. It's caused lots of disruption and huge costs, and as Paul and Kailash were pointing out, it's brought lessons that we really need to learn. And one of them is it's highlighted how short and how fragile our supply chains are, from the food we eat to, of course, essential supplies of masks and ventilators and so on. And people started to realize, for example, people living in big cities, how much their food supplies depend on people who move around to pick crops from season to season. These people, like many others who are normally at the bottom of society in terms of recognition, compensation, and respect of their rights, suddenly these people became visible. And this new term of essential workers came in. And this is really important, that the essential workers are the nurses and the people in care homes and those dealing with the pandemic. They're also the people who are in these supply chains who've kind of been ignored, and mostly their work goes unrecognized, and they're often paid very little and work in bad conditions. So let's not forget about them again. It's really important that this supply chain of generosity extends back through the real supply chains. And finally, there's a wonderful quotation from Gandhi that I just wanted to remind everybody of. I liked Paul Polman's comment that infinite growth is not possible when you live on a finite planet. And we now have the questioning of the economic model we all live in as never before. And I just leave you with what Gandhi said about this a very long time ago, but it's all the more relevant now. He said, "The world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. And generosity is a way of remembering the need rather than the greed." Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. This is a great statement, and thank you for all the work that you're doing on in making a more inclusive supply chain, but also for this nice quote of Gandhi. And I think this is a nice bridge to the work of Dan Stam as a professor in leadership, and you're specialized in creativity, and it seems like a human need to be creative, right? And it's somehow the solutions sometimes seem far away,
But I think your work demonstrates that it starts really simple in a way, and starts with yourself and with creativity. But I'd love to hear your views also in the context of what you heard this earlier today.
Thank you, Sander. Yes. Let me see whether a simple professor that tries to teach creativity skills to people can add something to the discussion. Because so far I'm pretty much in awe of everyone and what's been said. It's really great. So let me start with Kailash, who said we have to reclaim our humanity in terms of compassion, and I think that's really true. And I would add to that, let's also reclaim our humanity in terms of creativity. And it's a small thing, but it's really important, because creativity is important. Right? We know from research that leaders that are more creative are more effective. CEOs say that creativity is one of the most important skills that they have. We need our creativity to solve our problems. We need creativity to adapt to our environments. And creativity doesn't only let us generate new ideas, it also lets us be open to others' ideas. And that's really important as well. So we can do this alone, we can do this together, we can do amazing things if we allow our creativity to flow. And the good news is that creativity really is part of our DNA. We're hardwired to be creative. Our brains are associative. We use them for trial and error learning all the time. We are born with a curiosity for novelty. So we are hardwired to be creative. And that's the positive side of it. At the same time, there's also the negative side of it. And that's what we see, is that when people go through life, it's almost as though that life beats the creativity out of them. And they go to school and they quickly learn that they shouldn't be playing anymore. That they should be doing math. And then they go to high school, and then it's more math. And we go to university and it's even more math. And it's just analytical skills that are really important. And then we go start working, and it doesn't get any better. It gets worse. Creativity becomes less and less important. It's all about analytics and about numbers. And I think that's one of the reasons why Kailash says we can learn so much from kids. They still own their own creativity. And Polman says that the young make the difference. I think that's part of it, that the young people still are creative. And over life, we beat the creativity out of people. So for instance, I teach a lot of sessions to...
Can I ask, what is your assessment of why are we doing that? If we are such creative species, why are we beating that out of ourselves?
I think
it's also in the chat room was something about we have to unlearn suppressing compassion. So this seems to be something similar here with we're suppressing our creativity. Why do we do that?
So I don't think we do it on purpose per se. I think it's a thing of society, right? So what we do is we try to be efficient and effective, and we're ruled by economists that really focus on numbers and optimizing, but you can't optimize a human being. And creativity isn't optimal, but it's great and it's important, right? So to give you an example, what we know from research is that if you give creative ideas to people that are in R&D or managers, the R&D people are much more open to novelty and creativity than the managers. Now, think what that means, that we've created a system where we are, by nature, we're hardwired to be creative and adaptive and transformative and change things for the good. But then we've created a system that makes sure that all the creativity is actually beaten down and it doesn't come out. I think that's really terrible. So I think what we need to do, and I think that's the correct question to ask, is how can we create a system where people can be creative? And I think one of the answers has already been given by the people that are so much smarter than us, Polman and Kailash Satyarthi, is listen to the people that really are creative. Listen to the young people. And also, don't expect so much from them. Don't put so much pressures on them. Let them be free and let them express their creativity and their ideas. I think that's really important. It's a small thing maybe, but I think it's one to add.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. That's very clear and encouraging. And maybe, Sweetal, maybe you can reflect not so much as a young person, but as someone also representing the global South, because we assume, of course, we are familiar with the education system here in the Netherlands and Europe, and that's really efficiency focused. But how has that been for you in India and then traveling to another country? What is the story about creativity in your education system? or suppressing creativity?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I've been looking at the chat, and I know there are some school teachers and professors from India on this chat as well. So I obviously do not speak for the majority of India. I'm speaking from my own self. I think when I was in school, there was a lot of focus on rote learning. Personally, in my school, we were never taught how to critically think, critically analyze, or even question your teachers. The teacher was always right. And then whatever we learned, we had to go and spit it out in the exams. And when I moved to the UK, I came to the UK to do my master's degree, and I saw that there was a huge difference between education that I had whilst growing up and the education in, I guess, the higher education system in the UK, where we had to read a lot of academic papers. We had to make our own decisions, critically analyze, read from others' ideas, and build upon it as well. So personally, I feel like it really depends. We are surrounded by a lot of creativity in the form of, I guess, the mainstream media and the films that we see, but I still feel that true art isn't really accessible. The infrastructure that we need to have our creative thoughts isn't really accessible. For example, in the pandemic, I know that a lot of people had Zoom fatigue. We were in back-to-back meetings, even though we were working from home. And I don't know how many people have been able to cultivate this space to actually be free from things that society tells them, and to actually think and reflect and just understand what is it that they really want to do. So I think, personally, I think creativity is stifled a lot in the way that society works. And as Dan mentioned, it's all about the economics, right? And I know that in the Netherlands or in Amsterdam, they're going to be trialing the donut economics model now, which is all about like your own communities and regenerating within your own communities. And I think that's great. And maybe that could be an answer for long-term solutions for creating a compassionate economy. But yeah, that was my experience. I know that schooling system has slightly changed now. India, they are including more creative thinking skills. On the chat, someone mentioned we need to put the A back into STEM, which is STEAM, and I completely agree with that. I think if we take away the creative mindset, then we are just at the end of the day producing robots in a factory line. That's how I feel my school system was.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad you escaped that school system, and now you can blossom your creativity. That somehow you were born with that, I guess. Somehow we supply chain of gratitude, but we now really firmly on the level of how to educate ourselves and our kids to be a creative change agent and sustainable change leader, if you like. Maybe Heather, you can close off with some comments on the feasibility of that, because it is also a matter of policies. I mean, Dan mentioned we're ruled by economics, right? Is that true from an EU perspective, or is there hope that there is a shift also towards more human creativity and all that sort of thing? Of course, sustainability, European Green Deal is a big sort of point on the horizon. I think that's quite courageous, but is it backed up by the human policies, the creative, that unleashed creativity enough? Is that something you could maybe share one or two thoughts about?
I hope that it will be, because the young people of today, and here I'm talking about anybody who's just been up to the age of, say, 25, is going to live through an absolutely enormous, tumultuous time of change, perhaps unprecedented in human history, frankly, not just in the last century, millennium, but in human history, or at least since we started doing agriculture about 70 million years ago. Climate change is unfortunately going to bring enormous challenges, and those challenges will require a great deal of creativity, flexibility, ability to think in new ways, ability to think outside the box, as they say. And so equipping the next generations with the skills to deal with these unprecedented changes is absolutely vital. That's why I really support methods like, for example, the school in India, Sander, that you support, which aims to teach children through their own curiosity-led learning. Things like the Montessori method, which has been around for more than a century now, and other forms of pedagogy, as well as critical thinking, what Karl Popper, who wrote The Open Society and Its Enemies, as he put forward. Now, we need all of these skills. We need adaptability. We need also inner resources of resilience. It's absolutely vital that people are able to take the long view, to take perspective, and not to retreat to what one author on climate change has called the armed lifeboat. The idea that you grab as many resources and supplies as you can, and you head towards a lifeboat with lots of arms, and you try and shoot everybody who's trying to get in the lifeboat with you amid the rising seas and the rising temperatures and everything else. This would be a complete disaster. It would be a disaster not just for the vast majority of the world's population if those who currently have resources and power use those resources and power simply to create gated citadels for themselves and green islands where they can survive and nobody else can. But that also just doesn't work. That can only last for a short period of time, perhaps just a matter of decades, because ultimately there is only one planet. And we're pushing up against the boundaries in terms of air quality, which means oxygen that we need to breathe minute by minute, in terms of water, which we need. We can't survive for more than a few days without water. And of course, food supplies, as I was saying earlier. And unless there are, the armed lifeboat will only have supplies for a finite amount of time. Ultimately, you need to recognize an interdependent world and to have a sustainable economic model that includes everybody, which means a much more just and fair model. If any of humanity is ultimately going to survive. Now, that sounds quite apocalyptic, but unfortunately the climate science shows that it's very likely that, for example, the Netherlands, a country I love and which this whole initiative is based in, is really going to have great difficulty maintaining its land. Land for people to live on, let alone land for farming. Manhattan is going to be underwater. Mumbai, where Shwetal grew up, is going to have enormous difficulties in just maintaining the built environment. And of course, air quality will be an issue in all of these places. So if we are to foresee a future for people living on the planet by 2200, we have to take action now, but it's got to be action that involves everybody. And at the moment, there's still an assumption that those who have privilege, as Polman was saying, even if it's just the privilege of having grown up healthy and having got an education, if they are the ones who use the privilege to grab the resources, ultimately they won't survive either. Maybe for a bit longer, but they won't survive. And so generosity, compassionate leadership are essential because everybody has to be involved and everybody has a role to play. Behavioral change will be needed at every level of society, and whether that's in the corporate sphere, in the NGO sphere, in wherever you work and make your living, your own behavioral change will be needed in what you can use in every aspect of the supply chain. And that kind of compassionate leadership is what provides the larger perspective and the creativity and the flexibility of mind to find new solutions and to move from the current economic model that is now failing us. And so I hope very much that this initiative will give a lot more hope but also skills, really usable, practical skills. And that's what I'd really like to see in education, but also in lifelong learning. Also the kind of education that Dan provides, because we're all going to need this from whatever point of life we're in now until the very end of our lives.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Heather. That's very clear. I think we're running towards the end. I'd like to ask one of you, all of you, just to make a statement on the future of education in a minute, because I said in the beginning that we are launching, and this is today the inaugural meeting for that, the Future Planet Accelerator. That is an initiative of the of Peace Jam, who also works closely with Kailash, the Peace Jam Foundation, as well as the Garrison Institute that I'm representing, and we co-created the European Platform for Compassionate Leadership in Luxembourg with support of the University of Luxembourg, and we envision it's a sort of a summer school for young students, for young people, students, young professionals, to really work on actualizing sustainability, the European Green Deal and Sustainable Development Goals. And so we're planning for that. And it's really rooted on this vision of compassionate leadership. And we'd love to sort of, for you to, to try to capture it in one sort of recommendation, as or some sort of endorsement. What would you say? Why is such initiative important for young people to join and for other stakeholders to support it? Yeah, that would be, I think, a good takeaway from this part of the dialogue. And then we have a break, and we can go into the breakout sessions. And we continue this discussion on leadership around business leadership, civil society leadership, and more public leadership in the three sort of traditional sectors. But if you can think of just an endorsement as a closing statement, I think that would be great. We can take that further in the breakouts later on. So who'd like to start? Sweetal, you're the youngest, you're the most agile, resourceful. You can start.
I think to keep it brief, I think things like this are important because currently our schools or our traditional education systems do not expose young people to what the world actually needs right now, whether that be in terms of the future of work or the skills they need. And I guess also just looking at different people as role models, bringing the diversity of workforce and looking at what other organizations are already doing. When we think about the companies that young people want to go and work in, usually Unilever would be the top choice, as you mentioned itself when introducing Paul, and that's because Unilever is so well known and it's always in people's, mindset and in their eyes whenever they are browsing things online. And I think setups like these are important because then young people are actually aware of what else exists out there, and also them learning from their own peers, but also established people can really help them get mentoring and coaching which they need to contribute positively to society. And also it creates this safe space where they are encouraged to think about a vision, have a vision, but also fail. I think failure is key to creativity. Our society right now does not encourage people to fail as much, and I hope that this new initiative can encourage people to fail and learn from those mistakes to make better choices. So I hope that can also be a part of this initiative.
Great, wonderful. I like that a lot. Encouragement to fail. Yeah, wonderful. So Dan or Heather, you want to start? And then Dan, the professor, has always the final word, right?
I have just a one sentence. Compassionate leadership is the only kind of leadership that is adequate to lead us through these turbulent times, because it leads not just the head and the hands, but also the heart. And so I would fully endorse compassionate leadership as the model to go forward in both its theoretical sense of developing compassion, but also very practically.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah, I can only agree with that. I think that the important thing here is that we avoid the arrogant notion that education is about putting knowledge in kids, making them better. We have the knowledge, we put it in kids, and then kids become better. I think if there's a risk in education as well, that you stifle the development of the kids, because kids grow up to be, naturally, they grow up to be great adults that are much better than we are. So I think in our education, we really need to focus on development and natural development and let nature take its course as well, and not stifle too much. I think that's really, really important.
Thank you. That's a lovely closing comment. So we'd love to hear from you also. I mean, we have limited time in a session like this, but we've opened up an assessment. You can make an assessment of what you've learned, and you can also share some of your ideas as to how we should move forward with these dialogues in the Future Planet Accelerator in the Mentimeter system. You can find it in the chat room how to do that. So I encourage you just to share your thoughts and your vision for the future, and also like to hear where you're from, what's your background, etc. Because it's so nice to create this global community. A term that Polman is using often is to create courageous collectives. I think also in education, we need that courageous collective. And maybe we should call it courageous, compassionate collective from now on. Triple C, something like that. Right. So, well, thank you, Shwetal, Heather, and Dan for your reflections and your wisdom